It's time for a look now at the day's business news, starting with the US and China at an impasse in negotiations to end their nearly year-long trade war as Washington raises tariffs on Chinese goods. Brian Quinn is here with more. Good morning, Brian.
Hello, Delano. Yeah, it's a big change in tone from Washington and Beijing in recent days. Early last week, a deal seemed imminent to remove each side's tariffs on the other's imported goods. Donald Trump, though, now saying China broke the deal by walking back commitments made in earlier negotiations. Beijing now threatening countermeasures. Shirley Sitbon has details.
Donald Trump tweeted the words again on Sunday. "We will be taking in tens of billions of dollars in tariffs from China," referring to the existing and new tariff hikes imposed on Chinese goods meant to pressure Beijing and rebalance trade. On Friday, the U.S. hiked tariffs from 10 to 25% on $200 billion worth of Chinese goods. And Donald Trump threatened to impose import taxes on the remaining $300 billion in Chinese imports. But experts and businesses have established that U.S. importers and consumers of Chinese goods have been paying much of the extra tariffs as prices have soared. President Trump's own economic advisor has admitted it.
But it's U.S. businesses and U.S. consumers who pay, correct?
Yes, to some extent. Yeah, I don't disagree with that.
But the advisor says China will suffer because its exports would drop. The U.S. administration hopes that would bring Beijing back to negotiations. But China says its economy is strong and that it will not bow to any U.S. demand it deems unreasonable. The U.S. wants China to change its laws to include policies on intellectual property protection and forced technology transfers to protect U.S. companies. But a newspaper controlled by the ruling Communist Party said on Monday that no one should expect China to swallow bitter fruit, meaning it's not planning to give in to pressure.
One bright spot emerging over the weekend in that trade news, a potential meeting between Trump and Chinese President Xi Jinping at next month's G20 summit in Japan. That, though, not enough to reassure Asian investors on the markets, with all major indexes losing ground. Tokyo's Nikkei index closing down nearly 0.75% as SoftBank shares lost around 3% there. Hong Kong is closed for a holiday, but the Shanghai Composite off around 1.2%. The Kospi in Seoul ending the day down around 1.4%. European markets, though, apparently cheered a bit by that prospect of a meeting, with London opening up just under 0.2%. Paris's CAC 40 just around 0.1%. The Frankfurt DAX on the other side of the flat line now. The next, the United Nations is kicking off a major push for progress on climate change. Secretary General Antonio Guterres in New Zealand Sunday, putting a strong focus on economic efforts. He called for an end to government subsidies to the fossil fuel industry, as well as increased education to support a changing labor market. Guterres also pointing to tax strategies to reduce carbon emissions. Here he is.
We need to make sure when we adopt measures that increase costs, that we reduce costs in other aspects of the economy. So what is very important is not to say, let's increase taxes on carbon. What I say is let's shift taxes on jobs, taxes on salaries, reducing them, and eventually increasing the taxation on carbon.
And finally, for business, the meat industry is casting a wary eye on a new threat. At an international trade fair in Frankfurt last week, young butchers competed for top honors in a meat carving contest, slicing up beef shanks and pork bellies. Meanwhile, nearby, other stalls presented vegan meat alternatives. The plant-based protein industry is currently booming. U.S. startup Beyond Meat just notched Wall Street's best public stock offering of the year, shares gaining over 150% in their first day of trading. Supermarket sales of meat alternatives were up nearly 20% in the States for 2018. It's a trend that's continuing here in Europe, with Nestle and Unilever getting in on the action. Many of the young butchers at last week's event insisting plant protein can never be considered meat. But even that opinion is not universal in the changing industry.
I could see myself doing this sort of competition with synthetic meat because it's becoming a major part in the world, and it's something I want to be involved with as well. And I'd like to sell it.
A vegan fever, Donna, catch it.
You, Brian Quinn, constantly pushing his vegan agenda here
Join us.
on France 24. Thank you very much for that, Brian. I'm not joining you. No, I will resist.